Hey everyone, awesome work so far. We've made a ton of progress. So now that we're displaying a list of all of our entries, let's set up the controller action and view needed so that we can link to and see all the details of each individual entry. So let's start in our entries controller. Jumping back into the code, come here, app, controllers, and entries controller. Go ahead and close this out. Okay, and now right below our index action, we can define a show action. And like in our index action, we're going to need to define an instance variable. And since we're only going to be returning a single entry, let's call this @entry. And we'll set the value of this to current user dot entries dot find params ID. Now, I want to take a second to explain what's going on here because this is a bit different from the index action. So we're starting off by finding the current user and then finding the entries associated with that current user. And then we're saying find params ID. So by calling the find method, which comes from active record, we're essentially just running the necessary SQL to query the database to find the entry based off of this ID. But where is this ID coming from? And what is this params here? Let's start by pulling up our routes. So I'm going to stop the server. And I'm going to run Rails routes-g entries. So looking through the controller column here, we can find our show action. And if you look at the associated URI pattern, right here, you'll see that we have entries/:ID. And whenever you see something with a colon in front of it, this means that it will be a dynamic value, like in our case, an ID. But again, where is this ID coming from? Well, this ID comes from the params hash that Rails provides to us during requests. When we link each entry in our index page, we'll add the ID to the params hash, and that's why we can access it in our controller. So let's go ahead and do that right now. So I'm going to start the server again. And I'm going to close this down. And we're going to go into our views, entries, _entry.html ERB file. Let's close that. And now we can use a link to method to actually link to the individual page. So let's give it a little bit of space and do link _to, and I'm going to wrap this in parentheses. So entry.name will be the anchor text, and we're going to want to send this to the entry path, and then we'll pass in the entry. And we don't have to do .id because Rails knows to extract the ID from that. And this is where the ID comes from. By passing it to the entry_path method, we're adding it to the params hash, and then we're able to access it in our controller. Now, before we can test this in the browser, we need to quickly create our show template. So let's do that right now. So in entries, we'll create a new file and call this show.html.erb. And in here, we can create an h1 tag. Then we can open up some ERB tags, and we can call @entry.name. Wrap another div here. Then let's open up ERB tags and call @entry.url. For now, we can leave it like this. We'll get more into styling in the next section. Now we should be able to view this in the browser. So let's go check that out. I'm going to refresh, and great, everything has been linked now. And if we click on the last one here, we see the name and the URL. Okay, so now I want to close the loop on our params hash real quick. So let's jump back into our code. And I'm going to close this stuff up real quick. And in a new div, let's open up some ERB tags, and let's just type the word params. And I'm going to go back into the browser. This is our params hash. So we have a controller, which routes to our entries. We have an action that is routing to our show, and we have our ID, which matches the ID in our URL. And again, you can see that there's a controller and an action here, and this is how our routing knows what controller and action to route incoming requests to. So I'm going to jump back into the code and quickly delete that. And the final thing I want to go over is an error that you are going to see if you try to go to an entry that we created before we added in our active record encryption. So let's add in one of the fields that we have encrypted. So we can go ahead and copy this and change URL to username. So I'll save that. And if we go back into the browser and we refresh, we see our username as expected. But if we go back to the main page, and if I click on an entry that we created before adding in active record encryption, we're going to see an error. Here it is. Active record, encryption, errors, decryption in entries show. Not very helpful. But if we go into the documentation and we look down here at 6.1.1, we see we have a supports and unencrypted data. And this is saying when true, unencrypted data can be read normally. When false, it will raise an error. So essentially what this means is if Rails is expecting an attribute to be encrypted and it's not, it's going to throw an error. Rails is basically saying, hey, you're telling me this should be encrypted and it's not, and I just want to let you know. In our situation, we created a handful of entries before we included active record encryption. We've since told Rails that we want our username and password to be encrypted, but these ones are not. So that's why we're seeing the error. So we could technically add this line into one of our config files and set it to true, and that would be fine. But we only have a few entries, so I'm just going to delete them all. And we can do that by jumping into the code, pulling up our terminal, stopping the server, running Rails console, clear this out. And if we do entry.delete_all, we'll see that all of our entries have now been deleted. So before we check this out in the browser, we need to do a quick check to make sure that we're not trying to view a username or a password or a URL of an entry that's not there. So let's hop back into our code. And in our index file, we can simply do this. We'll open up some Ruby tags and we'll do if at entries.any. Let's render our list. Else, close that out. And then we could say no entries yet. We'll open up some ERB tags and then we can add a link to and say add an entry, and we'll do new entry path. Okay, that looks good. We should be able to view this in the browser now. So let's go back and refresh the page. We get this error because we're looking for an entry with the ID of 1, but we don't have that. So let's go here. And now you can see no entries yet, add one. And if we click on the link, we can go through the process of adding a new entry. So with this, we have finished section 4 on creating our entry resources. Congratulations, everyone. This is a huge milestone. We've done a lot of work, but we still have quite a bit left to do. So let's stay focused. And in the next section, we're going to really dig into Hotwire. We're going to transform our app into a single page application, or SPA, one that will be just as good, if not better, than if we did it with React or Vue. But we will be writing almost no JavaScript. It's going to be awesome. We're also going to focus more on the design so that our app looks nice as well. All right, everyone, get ready, and I'll see you in the next lesson.